Hey guys, it's Danny. Today we are going to be kind of answering a question that has been sent to me a while back regarding signs to look out for that tell us our orchid is recovering, tell us we're doing a good job. Now, somebody actually suggested this video, but I cannot find the comment. I tried all morning, so either my keywords don't work properly, either the comment finder in YouTube dashboard doesn't work today. I don't know, but if you know you've suggested this video, here we go. Hope you'll enjoy it. And PS, you might hear the AC running in this video. I absolutely have to. Yesterday was a rather busy day. I was horrible with time management, to be honest, and in the night time I just collapsed on the couch and totally forgot to close the window in the greenhouse, or actually grow space. Forgot to turn on the AC, and this morning there were 10 degrees Celsius in the grow space. Now I have 12 degrees Celsius. I need to warm up the growth space, so I hope the AC noise won't bother you too much, but yeah, there we go. I'm here with my jacket and everything. It's kind of cool, and I know my orchids really don't appreciate this. So with that said, let's start the subject. I do believe it's quite an interesting subject, and maybe I talked about it many years ago, but I'll go through some signs and just debate a little bit on them. Hopefully this will be interesting. Let's start. Now, there might be many things affecting orchids, many reasons why they might be stressed and recovering, and it's kind of impossible to go through every single instance, but I will take the most common, let's say, ailments, the most common situations that all of us at some point might go through. First of all, the rootless orchid. This is something we encounter very often, even or maybe more specifically with fresh orchids that we just purchased from the flower shop. Sometimes because of improper watering and care, they remain without roots. And this implies quite a few things happening. First of all, the orchid stops hydrating itself. Through roots, the orchid absorbs the vast majority of water it needs to survive. When we have no more roots, the orchid starts to become dehydrated. You can see here I have a case. The leaves become wrinkly, become limpy, and overall, lack of hydration is one of the biggest stresses orchids can go through. If the orchid cannot pick up water with her root system, automatically it cannot pick up nutrients either. So with a rootless orchid, not only can we encounter all of these common signs of dehydration, but we can also encounter some nutrient deficiencies, which can be yellowing leaves, blemishes on the leaves of all sorts. Some of these blemishes look like rotting, but they don't behave like rotting in the sense that they don't spread, and their placement on the leaf is a little chaotic. These are actually collapsed tissue because the orchid did not have the building blocks necessary, let's call them like that, to make proper and healthy tissue. So you can see how we can speak about a snowball effect. No roots means no hydration, and also nutrient deficiency in some cases. I'm not even gonna talk about lack of flowers and things of the sorts. As a little side note, and somewhat connected to yesterday's video if you watched it, foliar feeding and hydration is not all that efficient as you might think. Otherwise, everybody would just soak their rootless orchids every single day. We would have AOS articles on the matter. Everybody would do it, and we would never have stressed, dehydrated orchids. However, it doesn't really work like that. Water absorption through leaves doesn't even come close to the efficiency that root absorption has. Furthermore, a stressed and dehydrated orchid will also be more prone to pathogen attacks. Leaving pools of water in crowns, leaf joints, or even on the stems, pseudobulbs, or leaves is very risky. Therefore, I'm not going to talk about it. In my experience, it doesn't actually provide visible results. So, in the case of rootless orchids, of course, the best sign we can see on our orchid is new root production. New roots will be able to absorb water and nutrients, hydrate the orchid. All of the older structures which got dehydrated, but not to the point of actually losing integrity of the tissue, they will hydrate back, they will become plump again, pseudobulbs will become plump, leaves will stop having wrinkles and will start to perk up, as long as the tissue is not damaged. So if it's not yellowing, if it's not spotted in any way with dark spots, it has the potential to actually become hydrated. So first things first, when you see new roots, it's time to celebrate because it's the very first sign to know that your orchid is starting to recover. We're not out of the woods yet. First of all, the roots need to be babied a little bit. And I have here an example. This is my tuberolabium. It's a nice little orchid. It didn't come with many roots. The root system is very poor. You can see I have obvious signs of dehydration. And the orchid started to put out some roots. but they started to grow on top of the medium, and I have bark as a medium here, which is a good medium for this orchid, but on top it stays very dry. So these roots don't get hydration, and as you can see, they didn't even start to absorb water. In my experience, roots that have much more prolonged contact with water start to absorb water faster the first time they're produced. Therefore, in this stage, it is crucial that we do things right. First of all, nothing that can damage the roots in any way. I'm gonna start with hydrogen peroxide when we repot the orchid. Snails are the #1 killer of new roots. And I know a thing or two about snails. So hydrogen peroxide is my way of dealing with things, because these snails apparently don't like vegetables and beer and other things. No, they go directly for the roots or new growths. Second, no more moving around the orchid if you know you have a coarse medium. If I start to jiggle this orchid now, the root tips would be affected by the coarseness of the bark. If we have this orchid in moss, this is not a problem because moss is very, very fluffy. But not all orchids will be potted in moss. And third of all, trying to offer more moisture at the top. And as you can see, my way of doing this is just by placing a little layer of sphagnum moss. I didn't put sphagnum moss all over the place because I don't need it, but I do make sure that this sphagnum moss remains wet at all times. Every day I pour a little bit of water on it and it remains wet. Soon enough, these roots will start to absorb water. But if I wouldn't do that, they would pretty much be dry and do nothing for quite a lot of time. And right now, time is kind of the essence. But anyway, bottom line, roots are a great sign. We need to take care of them. We need not to disturb them, damage them in any way, because this might be the last bit of strength the orchid has, and we need to put it to good use. Second piece of good news, and this mostly refers to sympodial orchids which create pseudobulbs or fans or different structures connected by a rhizome, is a new growth. Now sometimes the new growth can actually start before the production of roots. Depends on the orchid we're working with here. So for some orchids, the new growth is the very first sign of starting to recover. The new growth will produce the new root system in these cases. So again, we need to make sure that this new growth is cared for properly. We don't damage it, we don't scratch it, we don't have snails and other pests in the medium that can potentially munch it off. And I've had it happen, because again, we're talking about the last bit of strength in some cases for some orchids. If this fails, everything will fail. So in very extreme cases, we only have one shot. Better make it right. Now, presumably we have the root system, we have the new growth is growing. We can expect that it will not grow very big. We can expect some wrinkling of the foliage. This is normal with some orchids that suffer from dehydration. We can have some spotting, as I was saying, due to nutrient deficiency, but trust me, it is a super great sign when we have a new growth matured, no matter how big it is, it can be even tiny, and a new root system to hydrate everything else. And even if it doesn't look so good, rest assured, the next growths will look a lot better. As you can see in my example here, the leaf spotting is gone. I even have some flowers here. The new pseudobulb is a lot bigger. Everything is plumper. In the end, all we had to do is wait and care for the orchid. And speaking about nutrients, the worst thing you can actually do for orchids which just put on new roots is to start fertilizing them. Moreover, fertilizing them with high amounts of fertilizer. At this stage, the medium is very prone to accumulate salts, to be overcome by buildup, because the roots first need to start absorbing that water. If you just see them growing, it doesn't mean they absorb just yet. They need a little bit more time to form the proper structures. So offering fertilizer to roots which cannot absorb water is a recipe for buildup. The buildup can be on the medium, but also on the roots and on the root tips, and in the end, it can burn the new roots. So do not fertilize in any way with anything orchids which are just producing new roots, which are tender and don't absorb water just yet. It would be a lot better if you could use distilled water, not tap water, if you know you have a lot of salts in your tap water. Everything with stressed orchids is more sensitive than something that's already established and vigorous. Fertilizer will come afterwards, and even if we have signs of deficiency, it is a mistake to start pumping all sorts of nutrients and additives into stressed orchids. The risk of actually losing the fresh root system is really high. So I would say that when you have some roots that absorb water, and you can visibly see the orchid starting to plump back up, whether they're the pseudobulbs which are plumping back up or the leaves starting to perk up and not be so leathery. That's when you can start to fertilize. It can take a month, it can take 3 months. It's okay. Orchids work very slow, so we must work slow with them. It's always better to start with lower amounts. Whatever you feed your normal orchids, your healthy orchids, split it in 2. Better yet, if you think your orchid is very sensitive, split it in 4. Give it only a quarter of what you normally dose. And just look at the roots, how they react. If the fertilizer starts to build up on the surface, obviously the roots are not extensive enough to absorb everything. So give it a flush, wait a little bit longer for the root system to grow a little bit more, or dose even less fertilizer. In time you will see the roots taking over the pot, the leaves starting to grow faster, or new growth in the case of sympodials. That's when you can start to up the fertilizer a little bit more, adjust it to your environment or season or the type of orchid you have, of course, and in the end you will reach with your sick orchid to your normal, let's say, fertilizer ratio. To me, when dealing with fertilizer and very stressed orchids, when it comes to root system, I barely fertilize, just enough to maintain the orchid growing. As a result, yes, there will be a lot of deficiency for the new growth, the first new growth it produces. Everything will look pretty bad. But it's okay, because my main concern is not the leaves, not the pseudobulbs. I do have older pseudobulbs that are now plump. My main concern is the root system. Afterwards, with the second growth, I can start to expect better looking results. I do prefer to take it slower, take it safer when it comes to dehydrated orchids. And since this is something I believe works and I do it myself, it's what I can recommend to you guys. In the end, with all of this process, the key word is patience. We have seen the new roots starting to grow, that's the first step. Then we had the new growth appearing, that's the second step in the recovery of an orchid. We have seen the new growth mature, even if it's smaller, but creating a nice root system, that's the third step. The fourth step would be the second new growth. And if we provided proper care, the second new growth of the orchid in most cases will be quite a lot larger than the previous one. So this is an example. This is what the orchid came with. This is the first new growth I had from the orchid. This was not a rootless orchid, but it did go through a little bit of a setback due to the repotting and adjusting to leca. And the second new growth, looky here. It's even bigger than the previous one. And this is a clear indication that your orchid is perfectly a-okay, 100% okay. At this point, you will see the leaves don't have dieback or blemishes that they used to have in the past anymore. Again, depending on the orchid, I'm showing you a Sherry Baby, which always has a little bit of blemishes, but nothing like in the past. Most orchids which suffered from some nutrient deficiency due to root loss will start to create beautiful, lush, new green leaves. And soon enough, if the new growth is big enough, some flower spikes will start to form from the base. I think I see something on mine. This one just matured. So I think you noticed that in all of my process, I didn't say anything about flowers. A flower spike or flower production is not necessarily a sign that the orchid is in good health. Sometimes orchids will push out a flower spike in their attempt to try and propagate, at least through flowers, because that's the main goal of orchids. If we're talking about hybrids, things are even more out of control because we have a whole mixture of genes there which sometimes act against the particular individual. Case in which I personally cut the flower spikes because they just drain energy. So if I have a barely rooted orchid with signs of deficiencies, with very tiny new growth, starting to put on a little tiny flower spike with one bud, that flower spike will not stay on my orchid and consume the precious energy that can otherwise be put in roots, new growths, leaves, and overall the immune system of the orchid. So that's my position on flower spikes. I know some people don't like to cut flower spikes. I don't like to cut them either, but I care more about the orchid than her flowers. When the orchid reaches this stage, then oh yes, I will enjoy the beautiful flowers because the show will be a lot better than the show a sick orchid can put on. Now, as you've seen, sympodial orchids which produce pseudobulbs will have tiny pseudobulbs if they're stressed, and then they will eventually grow bigger and bigger. This does not happen to monopodials because they don't have pseudobulbs. What they do have are leaves. And the same signs of setback can remain on a monopodial orchid as well. but in the form of smaller leaves. You can see on my ingracum here, we have smaller leaves here, but as the time progressed, we had a bigger and bigger leaves. This is the equivalent of bigger and bigger new pseudobulbs or new growths on sympodial orchids. So even with monopodials, we can talk about this setback, new growth which is smaller, but it's still very, very helpful. Orchids which are stressed because of a lack of roots, in my opinion, are the most critical ones. And typically we do deal with a lot of rootless orchids, but there are many other things that can stress orchids out. In my book though, it's not as bad in most cases. So let's say we are dealing with some leaf loss. Well, things are pretty simple. If we have a good root system, we can hydrate the orchid, we can give it nutrients, the orchid can actually push on a new leaf system and everything is okay. It's really not as dangerous as root loss. Also, we can have stress due to improper potting conditions or potting medium more exact. In this case, of course, the signs to look out for are new leaf production and how the new leaves look like. And if they look a lot better than before, then problem solved. In these cases, as you can see, when we have an issue affecting the orchid, resolving that issue brings pretty much normality, and all we have to do is just look out for the signs of normality, meaning green leaves, no more leaf tip dieback. If you're dealing with a pest infestation after treating the orchid, we need to look on the new growth if it has grazing or signs anymore, and so on and so forth. In many of these cases, we will not actually deal with a lot of setback. The orchid can actually still bloom. For monopodials though, leaf loss is pretty big. It's really important because there will be no structure to photosynthesize, so obviously with things like Phalaenopsis, you don't want to have leaf loss. But in case it happens, recovery is more of a time issue rather than anything else. You don't necessarily need to baby the plant all that much because you already have a root system. So the orchid will get water and hydration. Mind you though, the new leaves for a monopodial which lost everything else will be really tiny. We don't have too many structures to photosynthesize, and roots cannot actually take the place of leaves. They do photosynthesize, yes, but they cannot produce as much sap, as much sugars. So the new leaves will be very, very tiny. One thing I will mention is be careful with fertilizing. Again, these orchids don't need as much fertilizer as they used to, so look out for buildup, look out for accumulations on the roots or root burns or things of the sorts. That would be the only thing I would be careful with. Other than that, hydrate the orchid as usual and just have patience for the orchid to put on bigger and bigger leaves, and try not to lose the leaves anymore, but that's about it. So you can see how all of these instances, in my opinion, don't really require as much babying, as much things to consider. And without going into crown rot or stem rot or things of the sorts, which I will actually link you down to. I do have a video with life after crown rot or something like that, I don't remember. I'll link you to that video below. I talk more about what will happen after an orchid has crown rot. So I won't go into that. Pretty much rootless orchids are on the menu for everybody who has been in the hobby for a while, and they will happen at some point or another. If you don't lose the roots yourself, you will purchase one day an orchid which does not have roots. It's not the end of the world, and orchids are absolutely recoverable in most cases, and I hope this video gave you some ideas. Thank you for suggesting, and I think it's time to end here, so you know the drill. Like or dislike this video below, subscribe to my channel for regular orchid videos, tutorials, Q&As, and other fun orchid subjects. And if you want YouTube to notify you whenever I upload a new video, just turn on notifications for my channel. If you're interested in my setup and the products that I use, again, I list them all in the description. And let's just see, 13 degrees, almost 14 degrees. Yeah, we're going up. It's still rather cool in the greenhouse. I ditched the jacket and I'm freezing. I don't like low temperatures. Alrighty, bye.